Welcome to another episode of the Apex Perspective podcast. Today I have with me Abhinav Arora, who is currently a staff research engineer at Google. Now, Abhinav started off his career as a software engineer. Subsequently, he got into machine learning. And of course, like I said before, he's currently a staff research engineer at Google. But Abhinav, can I hear from your perspective? Tell me a little bit more about why you chose to become technical first and what led you to Google.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Aryan, for that introduction. I think for me, like choosing to be technical did not come by choice, I would say.
Mhm.
I think as a kid, growing up in India, most of, and being a part of a middle class family, uh, the common aspiration that most parents had for their children was, hey, just go get an engineering degree or get a medical degree, get into med school or an engineering school. For me, I chose like I was particularly more interested on the engineering side compared to the medical
Mhm.
side, so that's how I went into that path. But my love for technology actually came in, I would say, in the much later years of my undergrad. When I actively started learning about how computer science works, or how do all those systems that power everything in the world work. I think that is what piqued my curiosity a bit. I wasn't one of those students who already knew a lot about computer science before getting into his undergrad. In fact, like my, I mean, the first time I wrote a piece of code was maybe in my freshman year or sophomore year. So that's yeah,
Wow.
that
Interesting.
was yeah. And then
Okay.
I think from there it's just been the knack of solving those hard problems and
Mhm.
the passion for those that just kept fueling me from there. So
Very good. So you got into machine learning specifically, and that is a niche route you definitely went with being technical. My question for you is what was the reasoning behind getting into machine learning specifically?
yes, thank you. I think that's a really good question. I
Hmm.
think machine learning was very interesting. Like for me at my undergrad, I didn't have exposure to machine learning courses. I
Hmm.
think there was just one course that I had, which was more like a pattern recognition course and very rudimentary machine learning. So
Hmm.
as soon as I wrapped my undergrad, I started working as a full stack software engineer at Adobe Systems.
Hmm.
Was my job responsibilities were typical back end and front end development for one of Adobe's softwares. And in one of those projects, at one point, we had to, we needed to embed like a sentiment detection module there. And Adobe Research shared a package with us. So for me as a developer, that was like a black box package. All I had to do was import that, send a piece of text to it, and it would give me a score between 0 and 1. And as I
Hmm.
was playing with it, it really piqued my curiosity. Like, how is this thing even working? Because
Yeah.
as a full stack developer, you're always working with deterministic problems. Maybe there's some indeterminism coming in from infra, but overall, that okay, hey, there's a clear logic behind, and
Hmm.
when you have an input and there is an output, there's a clear logic. So I
Right.
started digging into these. That was a time when Coursera was getting popular. You had these famous machine learning courses from Dr. Andrew Ng on Coursera. So I started doing those to just understand what's going on. And
Hmm.
the field really interested me a lot. And that's what made me decide to go back to grad school where I could focus some time and, focus on this as a specialty.
Very
So, so
interesting.
that's, so that's how I got into machine learning. And yeah, my master's was entirely machine learning focused. Yeah.
Of course. So, were there other paths that you were considering? Because I've had the chance of interviewing a lot of principal software engineers, and a lot of them had the chance to become software engineering managers, and then subsequently, of course, got into leading other teams and becoming a principal engineer. Were you considering other paths, or was this something that you immediately caught your, this something that immediately caught your attention, and therefore you went forward with?
I think as far as considering other paths, I was considering few more paths, but most of them were like purely technical, not a
Hmm.
different archetype like going from individual contributor to being a people manager and you know being passionate about the growth of other people.
Hmm.
I was never sure about that path. As far as my other paths were concerned, I think my other technical interests were more in like systems engineering,
Hmm.
especially optimization of databases. That was one thing. which I was super interested in, and more like distributed systems research.
Hmm.
But then machine learning was something which just got, I mean, machine learning was something which just took me by, it was something that just made me go, oh, like, oh, what's going
Hmm.
on? How
Hmm.
is this even possible? So yeah. But yeah, not other paths. I wasn't considering any other paths as far as a career archetype goes. For me, all paths were still technical, where I could still
Mhm.
focus on working on hard problems.
Understood. And when you're approaching understanding these systems and processes and how it creates specific inputs or certain outputs, my apologies, do you have to have the end user in mind when you're going through these processes, or what's your thinking process when you're doing these processes?
That's a really good question, and I think the answer to that is a bit nuanced. I would say
Yes, it
it
is.
comes it is a personal framework, and for me, my personal framework on processing this is consists of several layers. I think at the first layer, I really want to understand the ins and outs of the system, not
Hmm.
keeping any user in mind, not being blocked by any constraint that you have. Because when you think from a user's perspective or from a product perspective, there's always like
Rules.
some rules and constraints that you need to follow, which kind of are kind of limiting your understanding if you begin from those. So I think my first step is to just get rid of all rules, get rid of all the artificial constraints, just understand the system and the processes end to end. Once I have a really good understanding, or even a fairly decent understanding, that's when I can try to play around with these different constraints, a user constraint or a performance constraint or a latency constraint and so on. So my layered process just makes me add constraints one by one as I develop my
Mhm.
understanding.
Really interesting. And so when you go to that process of after having removing the constraints specifically, and you thoroughly understand the system, my question for you is, after that part is done and you do add constraints of potentially what the user might use it for, what changes in thinking process after that to how you approach your products and your work?
I think what changes with that is that you become more practical. You
Hmm.
you know you don't think about decisions that are really good on paper but don't end up being good when you think about practical use cases. You get to talk to a lot of people, because the first stage essentially is more like your own knowledge building phase. But when you want to go and impose constraints, you're actually talking to people who are
Yes.
experts at those constraints. So if it's like users, you're talking about you're talking to UX folks, you're talking to like real users. When it comes to performance, you're talking to like other kind of engineers who are responsible for keeping those services up. So you kind of get a new perspective, which kind of just broadens your horizon. So and then it gives you a lot more ideas. I think it's a feedback process where you apply these constraints, you get some learnings based on applying these constraints, as well as based on other people you talk to. That again goes and solidifies your initial end-to-end understanding, and then
Hmm.
that understanding allows you to apply more constraints as needed. So
And
I think it's not like a linear. I think it's more like a
right.
cyclic process.
Sounds like it. Sounds like it. And
Yeah.
when you're actually understanding those constraints and how the end user will use it, and you're training these models, how important are the end users' inputs on what they want in terms of training these models then?
That's yeah, that's a great question. I think the end users are super important. You can have the best model that is out there, but if that model is not moving the needle for the end users, then
Hmm.
that model is not good. Like, I
Right.
can have the best model, but if that best model takes maybe 10 minutes to get back to you with a basic question because of the amount of processing it's doing, then
Hmm.
that model is not useful. Maybe that model is useful for a deep research style task where you have some task, you want the model to perform an independent research for some time, and then you'll come back to it. It's awesome. But if
Hmm.
you have a simple task like designing a travel itinerary for you, you're taking a vacation, you want to design a plan, and if the model tells you, if the model takes like 20 minutes to do that, that's not a usable thing. its response could be its response could be amazing. It could be like really well detailed compared to what you have today, but again,
Mhm.
it's not usable by the end users, so that just makes it subpar, in my opinion.
Right. So it is an actually important component in the process. And the reason I ask that question is because beforehand, when you are improving these models and you're thoroughly understanding the systems, you do remove those constraints. But later on, if you have to make it usable for the end customer, you have to understand what are their needs, how fast do they need it, and then of course you need to use that reasoning and that understanding information and put into your processes there. So that makes a lot more sense. Now, as far as creating actual enterprise value, I think you've had a lot of experience in understanding AI and how it can actually be really useful for companies. So, what is your perspective? Because there's quite a bit of a lot of varying perspectives on AI and agentic AI at the enterprise level. But from someone who actually has a thorough understanding of how it works in these processes, what is your perspective on maximizing the use of AI at the enterprise level, as opposed to using it just because it's a trend or it's a hot topic, of course?
Mhm. I mean, I think that's another good question. And as far as like the usage of AI in enterprise goes, I would say that there's not a one size fits all here,
Hmm.
because it comes down to the gravity of the problems as well. For a lot of use cases, I think the organizations should consider maxing out AI. What these things are, problems that are templated, problems that are repeatable, problems that where the stakes are, I mean, where if the AI messes up, the stakes are lower. I mean, there's less that can go wrong. I think the AI
It's
use should
dependent.
be, yeah, it should be maximized. So stuff like let's say let's say you're an entrepreneur, you're dealing with managing your accounts, you're dealing with responding to purchase orders or something, you're dealing with
Mhm.
customer support. I think these are some problems which could be maximized by the agentic AI, and
Mhm.
even your users may not even get to know of this. Where AI is headed, I can have an AI agent today that can behave as a customer service bot, and the users may not even realize that they're not speaking to a real human on chat. So,
Mhm.
so I think those are some problems that every organization needs to double down on. Uh, there are some other problems where the reward risk ratio is a little bit more biased, where you are getting reward, but the risk is very high. I think
Like
those are
healthcare, finance.
like healthcare, like finance, actually investing on your behalf. I think those
Mhm.
are some things where we still need to think more in terms of human in the loop and not thinking about, hey, I shouldn't use AI for this. I think our research, I mean, not research, but our application should go in the human in the loop process there, where you have a
And
human to give some supervision, because each of these problems still have those components which are repeatable, which can be made much faster with AI. So I think it is a spectrum, I would say.
certainly, and that's actually a pattern I've noticed with actually understanding the use case of AI. I interviewed the principal AI engineer at McKinsey very recently, and one of the claims he had, or core thesis that he had, is there's actually not enough humans in the loop or subject matter experts to actually review the processes AI has produced to make sure that these workflows are not having those hallucinations in the code. Because a single issue, a single hallucination can really be making it vulnerable to a legal risk, right? So the idea is there's actually, like you said, there's not his perspective on the limit is that there's not enough subject matter experts reviewing those processes that AI has produced. So that's actually a common pattern I've definitely seen. But to move this conversation to a different topic about really what you've been doing is, as from what I understand, a staff research engineer, you've had the chance to have input on the hiring process. Is that correct?
Input on the sorry, you meant input on the hiring process?
Do you have input on the hiring process?
Input is mostly restricted to interviewing at this point,
Hmm.
and then sharing like new openings for my team. So
Hmm.
kind of influencing the kind of people we can hire for the group that I'm a part of,
Hmm.
and interviewing across Google for those roles as well as other roles. So that's my primary input to the hiring process.
Interesting. So, what do you look for, or what would you specifically look for when you're looking for hiring? Is thought process very important to you, and how does that really how important is that to you compared to behavior and culture fit?
I think that's a good question. So yeah, I mean, I would say like behavior and thought process are super important things.
Mm-hmm.
Something like a culture fit is a very broad item which
Mm-hmm.
may not even be applicable to a company at Google scale today because
Right.
the company is so huge. Like if I was hiring for a 30-person startup, culture fit becomes a big thing because you want to make sure that the person you're bringing on is operates in the same manner as this 30-person group. A company like Google is much larger and has people from has people of all kinds of working culture styles. So you really can't have that fit. In my opinion, like
Understood.
the, the thought process and behavior patterns matter much more,
Mm-hmm.
especially if with people who are working with AI. I think the key behavior pattern that I want to look for is adaptability. The field is
Mm-hmm.
evolving at such a change,
Mm-hmm.
at such a pace. Something that you're picking up today gets out of it gets obsolete in a month time.
Yeah.
So the kind of people that I'm actually looking for are people who can thrive in some uncertainty, who can thrive in directions being kind of less clear because everyone is evolving,
Mm-hmm.
and who are able to evolve to whatever the changes are coming. You know like I'll give you a very concrete example.
Mm-hmm.
As an engineer myself, in a matter of a few months, I've gone to writing a lot of code per week myself to writing absolutely no code, and outsourcing it to agents, figuring out how to get my job done. It kind of required a different skill set because in my let's say in this previous role, I would thrive if I can focus on one thing for maybe 2 hours, where I can
Mm-hmm.
clear up my calendar. I know that this is a problem statement with, this is a problem that I'm coding for, or, yeah, whatever experiment I'm designing. I can think straight for 2 hours on that. I can keep pushing. But now, if I really need to thrive, I need to be able to multitask.
Yeah.
In that 2 hour, instead of focusing on that one problem, I need to think of myself more as an engineering manager, or
Mm-hmm.
who is able to outsource 5 different tasks to 5 different agents during those 2 hours, and you'll have all agents coming back to you, and you should have that ability to context switch. So
Mm-hmm.
that is a skill, or that is a muscle that I have to train myself for. So
Yes.
so I think that is the adaptability bit. And I'm sure, like, things are just going to keep changing. I'm talking about 5 agents right now. Maybe a few months down the line, I'll be operating at 100 agent scale or more. So
Mm-hmm.
so I think that adaptability is super important today.
Right. And adaptability in the right way. And now you're very technical, so you have a different understanding on different. You can see things other people can't see. So the question for you is, what are the leading indicators someone is adaptable in the technical sense specifically? Because as you did say that you have to change your focuses completely as a completely technical to understanding how to multitask a couple different agents. So what do you look for?
I think, as far as adaptability is concerned, I think what I look for is, let's say if I'm conducting an interview and we are going through a problem, I would like to throw something in between the interview, throw,
Hmm.
throw throw something additional in the problem that
Hmm.
forces them to rethink what they've been thinking.
Okay.
So, and I'm not really looking for them to come up with the correct solution in those 10 minutes, when I twist the problem in a different way. But what I'm trying to look at is, are they able to give up on their previous thought process, or
Hmm.
everything, or like, are they grounding everything in that old thought process? I think that
Really
is
interesting.
what
Yeah.
that is one indicator I can look for in maybe a 45-minute interview with somebody.
Hmm.
And that is what is important to me. Like, you want to make sure that when you are forced to adapt, you're not constrained or limited by your previous thought process, which applied to that old problem or applied to that old circumstance. And since now the circumstances have changed, you should be able to break away from the shackles of that old thought process. So
Yeah.
yeah, that's just a way of throwing this out behaviorally. So yeah.
Excellent answer, and an excellent answer to be able to identify those leading indicators and how you create those opportunities to insight. So I can really appreciate that. Now, what we'll do is go ahead and have a quick conversation about you and the podcast we planned for this year. So, Abhinav, the first question I have on the personal side, and this could be one of the hardest questions I ask on this podcast:
Okay.
what is something about your life that you wish more people knew about?
That's okay. I think yeah. The one thing that I wish that most people know about is, I often get reached out by a lot of folks who, who are either graduating or who are in the early career stages, and I talk to them that tell me what they really want, and often people just end up seeing the wins on your graph. Like, if somebody looks at your life from a distance, they'll just keep saying that, as if I were to put your life on a graph where the x-axis is the time and the y-axis is whatever you think you've achieved, uh, people would look at that more as a monotonically increasing curve.
Mm-hmm.
But when you zoom in, that's where you see those ups and downs, you see those big drops, you see sudden spikes. The journey is not as simple as what people end up seeing. And I think when I talk to like a lot of folks, their thought process is, hey, if I get into blah 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 school, I'm sorted. If I
Mm-hmm.
manage to get a position in XYZ company, I'm sorted. And that's what I usually tell people. It does not work that way. I mean, hey, so yeah, I think that is one thing which uh, I think I feel very strongly about, because I've also been in that situation where I've always seen the rosy side of things, and on others, and then kind of compared it to myself. Hey, why is it not rosy enough for me? And
Mm-hmm.
as I've matured, I've realized that the the picture is like the picture is not never complete. You really need to zoom in.
I'm really glad you said that because a lot of people see even my own physical transformation now, and what they didn't see is that I have a very addictive and obsessive personality, which is the reason why I was very I think it was middle school. I was almost failing out of school, and I was extremely obese because I really enjoyed watching TV. I enjoyed eating desserts, and when you have an obsessive addictive personality, you your life can go very bad very quickly, but you can use that same situation of having that personality for something good, right? Because after I made that change and understood it's important, I understood why I need to maintain good grades and why I need to be in good shape. That's when my entire life turned around to, of course, getting a 4.0 for the rest of my college ed and my high school career. But the idea is that not many people focus on that part of your life, and I'll even show like how bad it was for me physically. I was nearly obese, right? So the idea is I think you should be aware that people, even though they're successful now, they definitely have had difficult
Yeah.
circumstances in the past. And I'm really glad you mentioned that. And one last question for you personally would be, there's probably a lot of changes between you when you were in your 20s versus you
Mhm.
now. What do you think is the biggest change personally?
I think if I were to look back, I think the biggest change now is so that I think I've become a bit more rational, I would say,
Okay.
and more grounded to family. And I mean, I'm married now. I have a daughter, so kind of more grounded to family, and my decision making is less rash, I would say. uh, there are good, and there's a good and bad thing about that as well. I think the
Mhm.
good thing is that I'm able to think beyond, like, i- instead of just thinking about my own interest, I'm able to think about a much larger scope of influence here, like, in the interest of my family, my daughter, and those things. uh, and secondly, and also secondly, the good thing is that I've become more empathetic as a person as well. you
Mhm.
know k- Kind of more mindful, more self-reflecting. The bad thing about this change, I think, is that I think, when you're not restricted, same thing that we were talking about in the beginning. When you're not restricted by any constraint or something, you see things, you just go for it.
Yes.
And I think that has made that is something that has changed a little bit about me now.
You have more
Like,
risk. You have more risk
yeah,
now as
yeah,
well.
much more risk. Like, I'll give you an example. When I decided to come for my master's here to the US, uh, I was doing well in a career in India, and things were going fine. I was making decent amount of money. But then at 25, I suddenly leave everything, and I decide to come here. I don't have enough money to, when I get the admit at Carnegie Mellon, I look at the fee structure and the amount of money that's going to cost for my living expenses here. I see what I have. I see a loan that I was able to get from a bank, and the numbers don't add up. But then I'm like, okay, I'll go for it.
Wow.
I'm sure I'll get an internship. It's a good school. I'm bright enough. I'll get an internship, and then with all of that, I'll be able to make it through. So when I land here,
Really
the amount
interesting.
of yeah, when I land here, the amount of money that I have is lesser than what I am projected to spend in the next year and a half. But I just know I have confidence on my abilities. But now, at 35, I'm not sure if I would have done the same thing.
Of course.
Yeah.
Well,
So
that is actually interesting. Not many people weigh the cons and benefits of those changes, right? So I can appreciate that. Well, thank you so much for sharing that about yourself and really your thought process on your work. It's really interesting. Where can people learn more about you, Abhinav? Is LinkedIn the best place to learn about you, or is there somewhere else on the internet that's best to learn about you?
I think LinkedIn is the best place to learn about me, and I would say people should feel free to reach out on LinkedIn, on my personal emails. I'll be happy to share them here if
Okay.
people would like to reach out. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for joining me, Abhinav. It was a pleasure to have you on. This was our